Hi,
Hi, Billy.
how are you?
I'm fine, thank you. How are you?
Pretty good. Pretty good. Tudo bem?
Tudo bem.
Legal, legal.
Nice Portuguese.
Obrigado. Did I put, I guess I don't need my headphones. I think I can hear you fine.
Okay.
Beautiful, man. Well, thank you so much for having me. I really I love what you're doing. I'm learning some things, listening in on other people's history and everything and their process.
Oh man, thank you. First of all, I must acknowledge that I follow and I love your music. Long before I've heard that you were involved with conducted improvisation, so it's a big honor to me to have you here talking to me. It's
Thank
a
you.
big pleasure.
Same here. I'm glad. I love that you're into conduction and Butch Morris and his legacy and everything that you guys are doing in Sao Paulo. It's just so, I love, it's so beautiful. It's great.
Thanks, man. Thanks a lot. Well, I would love to start by hearing from you about how did you get involved with conducted improvisation, because I know you've been into music for a long time and doing a great job. But how did you get involved to this specific practice?
Yeah, I guess I would say there were hints of it when I was working with Bob Moses, the drummer, composer. Bob was like a mentor of mine in the 80s. And we actually met through Brazilian music because we both loved it, and we were in this batucada samba class in New York City, and so that I ended up in his band and working with him a lot for another like a decade, and watching him work with large groups, big bands, and he wrote things out, but he also did his own little bit of gestural kind of like conducting. That was kind of the beginning of this, like, hey, what's going on here? And then I would say not long after that, I started to play in bands in the downtown scene, the Knitting Factory and places like that. And that was the Lounge Lizards. And I did a handful of Cobras, John Zorn's Cobra.
Mm-hmm.
So that, and it was like, I did one with Anthony Coleman, one with Norman Yamada, one with Zorn. And it was it opened my whole, my whole mind up, onto like, okay, this is how you can work with a large or small group of improvisers and have somewhat of a system that leaves it open to let everybody speak how they want to speak, through their instrument. So that started to kind of like, collectively, as I was experiencing these different things, that was happening. And then listening and watching Sun Ra, I think he was one of the early ones, for me, like he was another genius who was just like created his way of getting people to improvise and having a little bit of control over it. And then I met Butch Morris. I met him, but I never played in his orchestra.
Okay.
But I was in Europe. I don't know where we were. We were at a festival. It might have been in Switzerland. And I was playing with John Laurie, a trio with John Laurie, who had the group The Lounge Lizards. We had a trio. And Butch saw me play. I played percussion, and Calvin Weston was playing drums, and John Laurie was playing reeds. And after the show, Butch said, "Hey, man, would you, I have this thing I do in New York, all over." And he said, "I'd love you to play." And I was like, I was like, this guy's so cool. First of all, he was just cool to look at and talk to. I could tell he had a vibe and he had a whole thing. But I didn't really know who he was, but that made me curious. But unfortunately, I was so busy, and fortunately, in a way, I had a lot of cool things going on. I was touring with John Laurie, and I was also in Modesto Martin Wood at the time, so I was like fully booked up. So I learned about Butch and running into him, and a lot of my friends were part of his stuff at New Blue and other places, and So I had Butch was kind of just like an influence as far as just knowing what he was doing and checking it out with records and things like that and talking to friends about it, but never being part of it. So that was another influence. You know, when Medeski Martin Wood did this record called The Dropper, I think it's a Blue Note, we actually had Marshall Allen play on something from Sun Ra, and he just improvised. But on that same session, we had a string group. We had cellist Jane Scarpintoni, we had Charlie Burnham, and we had Joan Wasser, and they were a string trio, and they overdubbed over a piece of music, and Medeski kind of conducted them through it. He didn't have anything written out for them. Our piece was already constructed by how we put it together, which is usually we improvise and we edited something together, and it was like became a tune. And so we put strings on that one. And Medeski, I watched Medeski conduct them in a way. It was like never seen him do it ever since that one time, and it was like very impressive, you know. So that was another influence. And then I met Carl Berger. Carl Berger is the legendary, you know, vibraphonist, pianist. He played with Don Cherry, and everybody played with Steve Lacy. And he started Creative Music Studio up in Woodstock, New York. Him and his wife Ingrid and Ornette Coleman founded Creative Music Studio together. It's a nonprofit organization that conducts workshops and performances, and he is one of the early conductors of improvised groups. It goes way back, you know, at least to the 70s. So when I started working with Carl, you know, I did a workshop of my own, and then I watched Carl work with the workshop orchestra. And then I don't know if it was before or after, but one time I was asked to be in his orchestra at a performance in the Village in New York City. And I did that, and that was, you know, I just like, wow, this is amazing, you know. So all of those experiences, you know, going back to Bob Moses and Sun Ra and Cobra, working with Zorn and Cobra stuff, was really the beginning. And actually, when the Cobra stuff was happening, I was coming into my own as an artist myself. I feel like not until I really experienced the downtown scene. I was probably in my early 20s, and I learned so much about the art of improvisation, but the radical way in which people were using it. So there were a lot of performances, and not just musical, but theater, and, you know, there was like the New Eureka Poets Cafe and that scene, and there were just people like really freestyling in so many different forms, dance and all this stuff. And so that helped me to sort of realize I could find my own way. It's okay. Like I can develop maybe my own thing. So the first thing I developed was something called Stridulations. Well, there's a 13-piece graphic score called Stridulations for the Good Luck Feast. And it was inspired by crickets and also by all the different key rhythmic patterns in a lot of Pan-African music. So, which if you ever look at a book, it's kind of a drum rhythmic method book called Rhythm, Claves of African Origin, where I use the graphic notation. It's just really X's and dots that, you know, so almost anybody can figure out what the rhythm sounds like by looking at it. They don't have to go to school or study any notation. But that started this system where I could have people read and choose these different patterns and kind of create a sort of rhythmic structure, a structure of patterns that could be also freely played, not based on everybody being in the same tempo. Mm-hmm. And anyway, so Stridulations was my first real like attempt at a system where I could prompt everybody. I could give them a card which shows you, you know, maybe 6 different rhythmic patterns that have a relationship when played together. But who plays when is really up to the group, although so they kind of like, in a way, they self-govern themselves, but then I'll be there to kind of pull some things out, create some space and form and things like that. And that's no different than like the Cobra signals, which is like, you know, you put your hand here and you go like that. And that just means, okay, get ready, now stop, you know.
Okay.
I mean, very simple stuff like that. So that's when I started getting comfortable with sort of like a system. And I would say around that time also, I was starting to put together groups of improvisers at this club called Tonic. I think was really one of the first sessions. And it was with like, you know, it was Melvin Gibbs on bass, Shelley Hirsch, Min Chao Fen on pipa. Shelley Hirsch was a singer. Calvin Weston on drums. I was on drums, percussion. A lot of different people would come in and out. And I was just getting comfortable with like letting the group kind of just listen to each other and just play without controlling it very much. And I was a little bit shy about controlling it. I had so much respect for these people. I was already blown away that they were like, they said yes to this gig. It was called Drop the Needle, was one of the bands I called Drop the Needle, and Socket was another one. And they started to tell me, we like when you cue us, like we like, you know, like, you know, do, you know, shape it now and then, like, and I was like, really? Okay. And then that was kind of the beginning of like being blessed, you know, like, okay, and it's okay for you to control us a little bit, to direct us. So through that experience, I got a lot of experience through that. Then it was really, now we're going back to the last 4 years maybe, where I started working with Carl and teaching and participating in the creative music studio workshops up in Woodstock and in the city. And I would say it's really been only about a couple of years since I've been working with like an orchestra, or put together my own group, or did something with Alarm Will Sound about 2 years ago. Medeski, Martin Wood, and Alarm Will Sound did a live concert in Colorado. This is like 5 years ago. And I wrote a piece, John wrote a piece, they wrote some pieces with that orchestra and us involved. Alarm Will Sound is a great chamber group that can work up to 30 plus musicians or down to like a smaller ensemble. And they only work with new music, composers, like, you know, premiering their new music. So this was our work together. And that led to celebrating the record release 2 years ago. And at the very end, well, during rehearsal, they said, you know, what are we going to do for an encore? Because they didn't have any more music. So I was like, what? Give me a shot at just conducting. I have a very simple system. And I said, it'll take me 2 minutes to just explain it to you, you know. And I did it at rehearsal very, very quickly. I mean, we literally did it, 2 minutes. And they got the concept. And then we did these show, you know, we rehearsed, we did a big show in Brooklyn at Brooklyn Steel. And at the end I got up there and, you know, and we went through this. It was a great, beautiful experience. That to me, I felt was like okay, now I felt like I can work with classical musicians who improvise a little bit, you know, but they're not primarily improvisers. They read a lot. So I felt like at that point it's like, I'm very familiar with working with, you know, master improvisers and also student improvisers, and also some people that are open to improvising, but that are not necessarily do it a lot. But working with a classical chamber orchestra and getting to a high level of music was really it for me. And I was like, okay, I've got to make a record myself. And and that led to this record, Meshes, which I released last year. And I could go on about that, but I don't want to bore anybody.
No, no, man, that's very cool. And thanks for sharing. It's a great story. I love to hear it. And well, lots of things caught my attention in what you were saying. And I just remember that you a few months ago you did play with some fellow musicians from Brazil and Japan, and the Quarta B.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then they said to me that you didn't really do no rehearsal at all, uh, and then, well, because you are saying that you are used to do the same thing and play without rehearsal, maybe just explaining in 2 minutes what is your practice, your creative method. Could you explain in 2 minutes to me
Yeah.
how if I would play with
Yeah.
you, how it
Yeah.
would be?
Yeah. Yeah. So this system that I consider mine is something I call Pointillism. It's like point dash illism. Ill is
Okay.
kind of like a nickname, Illy B, part of my name, Billy, Illy, William. So Pointillism, and it's a pulse-based system. So the first thing you need to know is I give you number one or number two.
Okay.
Okay. When I give you number one and I give you a downbeat, I cue, that means you pick your own note, whatever sound, I'd prefer to say sound as opposed to pitch. And the pulse is what you're choosing more. It's like you're choosing your own pulse tempo. So your pulse is going to be a constant pulse, whether it's ding, 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 or ding, 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 but it's a steady pulse. And you hold that, and whatever note you chose, whatever pitch you chose, you hold that until my next cue. If I give you this again and give you a downbeat, it doesn't mean change your pitch. It means change your pulse tempo.
Okay.
Okay. When I give you number two, it means, and a downbeat, it means change only your sound, your pitch, but you hold your pulse tempo.
Okay.
So it's give me a pulse. You give me your own pulse tempo. Change your pulse tempo, change your pitch.
Okay.
And then I'll do this together, and then you have the option to do either or both, or not change at all, or drop out. But whatever you choose to do on my downbeat, you have to hold it until the next cue. So everybody acts as sort of this organism. It's sort of like it creates an immediate sort of minimalist rhythmic landscape, really, because if you have one pulse is ding, 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 and the other one is dum, dum, and the other one is dee, 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 and then da, da, da. Now you combine that together and you're creating this mosaic of a minimalist sort of, feeling. Then you can start to change that. You can start to, I can say, maybe if you're in this section, I'll say here, maybe it's you and 3 string players and 2 horn players are here. And then I'd say here, and I'll say, that cuts you out. Volume up, volume down. Then I'll start to introduce glissandi up, glissandi up. I'll do things like, this means give me like a sforzando hit.
Okay.
Then I give people solos, but it's really just based, if you know this and this, we're good. And then I can bring people out in solos. I can break things down, bring your volume down, bring your volume up. And then we can build on that. There's different ways to say, hey, remember what you just played, and then cut you out, and then cue you back in and have you replay something. But it's really just this number one and number two, pulse, tempo pulse, pitch, or sound. Does that make sense?
Yeah, totally makes sense, man, and it's really great. And well, I've been watching some of your footage that you have on internet that you were conducting, and it really seemed that your practice is rhythm oriented. I mean, when I was watching, something that really caught my attention was the way you have this rhythm oriented kind of practice, but it doesn't really sound groovy. It sounds much more like a texture, much more like a polymetric, polyrhythm, and it was really interesting to see you doing that. And well, I perceived that sometimes you didn't really give the downbeat. Sometimes you just did something like this or something like this, and then you were cueing, in the real time, like, and this is something that interests me a lot, which is free gestures, well, I mean, gestures without a meaning, without a directive, just waving your arms and feeling how the people interpret you waving your arms. Do you have the same experience?
Yes, it's very important for me to be careful not to control too much of what's really coming out of each musician, what's coming out of the group. The most important to me is that the group acts as one organism, as the group sounds as one. It's not, you know, like I'm not interested in somebody who's highly technically can shred a solo or can interpret everything perfectly or whatever. It's like I'm interested in everybody playing a small part together, and then you can get your chance to solo. But yes, I think like there's just these two things leave up a lot of choice. You have, you know, someone could just start their own pulse and their pitch comes with it, their sound comes with it. Two is I'll have you change it, but it's up to the musician to choose their own pitch and their own pulse. So right from that start, they have a lot of freedom. From then on, it is about having gestures that may even come up in the moment that they haven't, you know, that I haven't given them. I don't want to have 50 different signals for them to have to memorize and think about. I want them to really be in the music and listening, and I'm not just there to kind of guide it and shape it, give it some form. So with these kind of simple gestures, we may learn something on the bandstand together. I always tell everybody in the group that I may do something that you don't understand, or I'm doing something new, and just go with it. Like interpret it however you feel, you know. And then we'll talk about it later. You know, it may be something that'll be introduced. There are other ones. They're like things like this. This is give me a non-musical sound, like what we could say was noise.
Okay.
And so whatever that contrast is to what we're doing, this is just give me noise, like whatever noise is on your instrument, not rhythmic, not melodic, you know, not harmonic in a sense.
Okay.
But so some of those things come out of like each experience. So I may have maybe 10 key ones, 10 key signals, but I can't even name them all right now. They're so simple. I may give this is like a trill. You know, I'll just do this, you know. So we'll go over that in rehearsal. You know, if we have a sound check, we've got usually have about a half hour, and I'll probably run it 10 minutes. If we want to go deeper, we'll go 20 minutes, but 5-10 minutes is plenty. You know, get everybody comfortable, get their sounds, get them sounding right, get them feeling comfortable, go over this thing and not have too many things to learn. You know, signals. I'd rather the ensemble, the musicians have more control on what's happening than me. But there's some basic things I want them to, you know, to understand.
I love the simplicity of what you've created and how you do take a lot of it. You can do a lot with that. And well, going to a more philosophical way, something that you mentioned, which is control, freedom and control, is something that interests me a lot. And I really want to. You already talked about a little bit about that, but I really want to understand, in your point of view, in your opinion, which is the role of the conductor? If you know. Thinking about control and freedom, what does the conductor is really needed for?
Well, for me, the ultimate goal is for the group to self-govern themselves. That's the ultimate goal. That's the ultimate goal in my stridulations pieces, is that they understand certain kind of rules of the game, and it's a game piece. And as long as they understand that, they should not have a conductor or a prompter. For me, I think the conductor or the prompter most often is allowing there to be more space. It's always an issue, I feel like, that people just, you know, don't leave enough space. And the conductor's there to kind of, I think, for me, that's been my number one thing, is give it some space, you know. Take some musician, give a chance for also for, you know, duos and trios, and break it down, and like, you know, but I would say it's more about the freedom of the musicians than it is the control of the conductor. Absolutely. Like, I think it's about the music. It's about the musicians that are there. You know, it's not about the conductor. I'm not into that, you know, but of course it feels good. It really, if any, as you know, it's the euphoric feeling of being in front of all these incredible musicians making this sound that we've never heard before almost every time is such a gift. And to be right there almost in the driver's seat in a way. But it's really, it's not about me. It's not about the conductor. It's about the result is the music, and getting the music out in the moment. I think a good conductor in an improvising orchestra can see where the potential is, and can sense, you know, who's got, you know, when is maybe the right time to bring this musician out and this section out, or whatever that might be, without it being about their ego, the conductor's ego. It's more about sensing, like, you know, it's time for, you know, it's time for the string section. It's time for that, you know, oboe solo, you know.
100% agree, and I love your insights. Yeah, man. I truly believe the same thing you were saying, and well, still in this mood, do you think it? How do I put that? As a conductor, do you think that something can go wrong on stage, or have you ever got frustrated as a conductor? Did you face any challenges while you were a conductor, or do you feel, because some people believe in no mistake at all, no errors, no mistakes, and how do you feel yourself in this situation?
I haven't had much disappointing experiences. I've been pretty blown away by the musicians, and I'm not just talking about, you know, master musicians from the downtown scene, or the Alarm Will Sound Orchestra, or musicians from the Ice Ensemble, mixed with like legendary, iconic, you know, performers that I'm talking about students like University of Central Florida. I did something with a workshop with their orchestra, and it was an orchestra. I would say it was like a new music ensemble, and they were like there was 50% percussionists, and we're talking about 20 percussionists. And I thought, this is going to be really difficult. And with these cues that I gave them, and with just being able to kind of keep everything at a whisper, they caught on really quickly. So that's just an example of something that could have gone wrong, but it didn't. And so I've had mostly positive experiences. The only problems that I occasionally may run into is that someone's not paying attention, they're not watching, or, you know, they're just not there. I have to kind of go down and, you know, bring their eyes up, because I want to cut this section off, you know. That's really important. People have to be focused on watching and listening. But you know what? I always tell everybody that if you feel really strongly that you need to just step out and play something without my permission or whatever, please do it, you know. Okay. And I think the balance of that, I don't encourage it. I just say, if there is something, you know, and there are times when I give you a cue, you always have the option to not play. So if I cue you and I give you a downbeat or something on a signal, you can choose to lay out. And I encourage that. I'm like, you know, so I just want people to give them the license to kind of be who they are in the moment, and not feel controlled. But I could imagine there may be some people that they just want to play, and they want to maybe solo over everything, and that could be a problem. But I haven't had that issue. I'm very sensitive to that. So, I mean, of course, I don't have the control over working with a workshop or students, which I do often. But when I work with the musicians that I choose, I know they're great without me. They're already great without me. So
cool. Yeah.
Did that answer your question?
Yeah, sure, man. And that's very cool. And well, in opposite to that, do you believe that there is something that, starts the fire in the moment, or do you believe there is something that is the pearl or the secret sauce for having a nice and interesting performance on conducted improvisation?
Well, do you mean during a performance, or do you mean setting it up?
I mean,
Yeah, well,
whatever do you feel that is really important for the performance be cool and nice and
okay.
interesting?
Well, I think there's two scenarios. One is you don't choose the musicians. You're dealing with whoever is in the room, which is very exciting to me. And then the other one is choosing the musicians, having the choice to create your own orchestra. You pick, who you want. And now, just as far as picking your own group, that is the key to your success. Before you even get on stage, these musicians, and how well they work together. And some of them you may not, and maybe a wild card in there. We're like, I'm not sure what the chemistry is going to be between Nels Cline and Anthony Coleman, or whatever it might be, or some, like these different musicians, but they're incredible improvisers and masters, composers as well. So you're going to probably get an incredible performance, just by picking the right people. But working with the other side of it, where it's totally unknown what experience these people have playing their instrument, and that to me is exciting. So I think the success for that is to be as simple as possible, like this. Giving them a choice. All you need to know is to just play a steady pulse, pick a sound, and just choose that pulse, and you hold it no matter what anybody else is doing. And we just hold that for a while, and it's pretty. Once we run through it a couple of times, we go through the two signals. Then you change your sound, but you don't change your pulse. Now you can do both. That is enough to just make people relax, and also give them the option not to play. So you don't have to play if I cue the group, if I cue the ensemble. Not everybody has to play. And so I think, to me, it's the simplicity of what you're, the simplicity of the strategy that you're teaching them is the secret. And then it's listening. For me, it's listening to what's happening and making choices and creating a form. Help to create a form, help to create a narrative, a story where there are some contrasts, where someone needs to come out and speak now. The whole group needs to just create a vibe, and that's all it is. It's just a harmonic vibe. It could be a rhythmic harmonic vibe, whatever it is. It could just be this sound that everybody creates together without a melody or a voice. Then there are the times where it's like, I need a melody, I need a solo, I need, And so it's just listening to the group, being really tuned in and sincerely appreciating all the sounds that are happening. And, listen, you find that one person's or an uncanny situation where two or more musicians, let's just say three musicians, they make this incredible sound, and you bring everybody out and you let them have that moment. Those kind of things, just being aware of what's happening. And not having any, for me, it's also being an improviser myself and not having any preconceived ideas of what I want. It's listening to what's happening in the moment. If I think it's way too busy now, there's too much going on, I'm going to clean it up, and I'm going to, take people out, and we're going to have less people playing, and you have to be aware of in the moment, but thinking like, oh, I want it to sound like this, or I want it to be a funky thing, or I want it to be a sound like Olivier Messiaen or whatever it might be. You know, I want it to sound like the Waves. You know, you can't do that. You have to just let the musicians dictate where we are. Let them make a sound, and then I react to the sound, and they react to the sound as well, and then we take it from there. It's no different than having a conversation with someone, like when you're playing music. You know, I've done so much of this, you know, where I just get on stage and we play. We don't talk about it, and we're so tuned in to each other. We have to listen. We have to support each other. We have to lead now and then. And it's no different than my role as a conductor is the same thing. I'm tuned in, listening to like what it needs. Like, let's bring this out. Let's bring that, like, you quiet, you more, just things like that. Just really hearing bringing out the diamonds in the rough.
Awesome, man. Yeah, I love the way you put things, and I totally agree with you. Great ideas. Well, another thing that I would like to ask you is about your career, about your art as a visual artist. And I know that you write some graphic scores. I think you mentioned them as automatic drawings or something like that. And I was very interested in knowing about these automatic drawings and if they relate to your conducted improvisation.
Yeah, that's a perfect question. Yeah, that's one of the aspects of working with an improvising group that I didn't mention, which I have been doing for years and years. Yeah, so I'm a visual artist. Like most of us when we're kids, we're drawing and we're like, creating this, whatever this world, escaping, and it's carried into my improvisation, where I can sort of use images to evoke sound, and so I've been in the past. I'm so terrible with like time and years. It's funny you're a drummer to say that. I'm so terrible with time, but it's true. Time is like a rubber band, So I would say maybe 10 years ago, I started kind of playing around. No, more than 10 years. Are you kidding me? So when I met my wife, it was like 96 or something like that. And
You're getting old, man.
She curated an art show for me. And it was in the East Village at Steve Cannon's place. And I had a little art show. Steve Cannon is a legendary poet. He was a Black Panther from New Orleans, lived in the Lower East. He came up to New York and lived in the Lower East Side. He went blind, and he ran a literary art magazine called Gathering of the Tribes. And he had an art gallery. And my wife, Phaedra at the time was my girlfriend, my friend, and she's also a writer, and she was helping him curate things. So she curated a show for me, and some of the things that were in that show were like very sort of art brute, very like sort of almost outsider art, drawings of birds and things like that. But some of them were these what they call, similar to the veve, the Haitian veves, which are part of the voodoo thing. They create these lines, these signs, and they sort of represent different deities. And I was inspired by that tradition, that visual tradition, which I think goes back hundreds and thousands of years of line art that has sort of like talismans and amulets and things like that, that have something that has a mathematical alchemy kind of like symbols, So I've always been very drawn to the iconic sort of line art. So at that time, I had a few different line drawings, and we exhibited them at that show. And who came? Butch Morris came. Butch Morris came. It was crazy. The people that came to that show, it was this little East Village, like, brownstone, but there was a little room with a gallery, and that was one of the. This was the second time I saw Butch Morris. because he was part of that scene in the downtown scene. He came down to check it out. So anyway, I'm sorry to regress here. So from that point on, I started experimenting more, creating my own sort of veves that were based on Haitian tradition, but just improvising with them. You know, like, you know, with Medeski Martin Wood, if anybody knows Medeski Martin Wood, we have that logo that's like a circle with a dot in it and has a few lines, and it has like, it's on a pedestal. It looks like a language, a punctuation. It looks like a hieroglyph or a petroglyph. So that's part of my line art. So I started to expand that out, and I started to get a little bit mechanical too, as well. Like as if an architect or someone who does graphic design uses different templates and things where they can draw a line and then they get a circle, ovals, and all kinds of different shapes and lettering. And I started to improvise and create these sort of, you know, much more complex visual improvised drawings. Automatic drawing is another word for improvised drawing. A friend of mine, Brett Littman, who was the director of the Drawing Center in New York City, he's now the director of Noguchi Museum, is one of the first people who said, yeah, those are automatic drawings, you know. And I was like, wow, that's such a cool word, you know. So yeah, automatic drawings, improvised drawings. And that became something that accumulated over the years, to the point where I wrote this book. It was a collection of articles I wrote called Wandering, and within the Wandering book I had all of these different line drawings, and some of them were specifically thought of as a possible graphic score, and other ones were not. They weren't intended to be, but then later I realized this could be, we could have someone perform this. And so what I did with that record was I asked different friends to interpret the drawings, and I would release a companion CD to the book. So I asked Bill Frisell, Nels Cline, all these incredible musicians to pick one of my drawings, and I would send maybe Bill Frisell 5 drawings. I sent Nels, you know, 4, and so and so, whatever. I would send them different groups of drawings, and they would pick their favorite one, and they would just record themselves playing solo, you know, interpreting the piece. And that was kind of the beginning of me exploring, okay, now this is like another way to work with musicians and get them to sort of conjure up, you know, their own sound. Maybe it helps them sort of guide them into how they would play. But drawing has always been something that I've loved to do, and again, Bob Moses, back in the 80s with Bob Moses, we would draw together, you know, on recording dates. We used to travel to Hawaii together a few times, and we just to hang out in the, you know, in the little shack or tree house or wherever we were, and, you know, just hanging out and drinking coconuts and swimming and drawing. And then I went on the road with John Laurie, another musician who also did his own album cover art. That's the thing. Bob Moses did a lot of his own album cover art. So did John Laurie. John Laurie was, you know, close with Jean-Michel Basquiat. They were roommates. So I learned a lot about Jean-Michel, who I didn't even know who he was until I met John Laurie. Jean-Michel had already passed, and I was joining the Lounge Lizards. And so I used to watch John, like he would be working on the album cover for a record we did called Live in Berlin, 2-volume record. And from that, you know, then we used to tour together, and we would both be drawing, like on days off in the hotel. We would just be drawing, sitting around, drawing in our hotel rooms, hanging out. And that just became feeding me more as like, this is another outlet, this is another way to express myself. And I am always experimenting with visual art, you know, and that could be print, it could be silkscreen, it could be video, you know, it could be sculpture, could be bamboo, you know, a lot of people know I love bamboo, I grow it, but a lot of it is just, you know, drawing, like a drawing style, you know.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, man, that's fantastic. I can just thank you for sharing all those great stories, And well, before we move towards the end, I just want to ask if does anyone has any questions, and please drop in the comments so Billy can answer some of them. And while people are writing their questions, would you mind in sharing, you know, one story or something that you bring in your heart about this practice, or something that happened to you, something that, you know, the first thing that comes into your mind when you are thinking about conducted improvisation?
Well, I mean, I don't have anything coming to my mind, but I will when it does. I'll.
Okay. So you already have your first question. So
Okay.
Can Billy define the word feel?
Yeah, I think, and oh, is there more to it or no? Feel. Okay, yeah, feel to me. Well, I would say it depends on where you're coming from with that word, but feel for me can be, you know, a certain rhythmic feel. Speaking as a drummer, it's like a swing. You know, a feel could be sort of how your finesse in the way you express your rhythmic flow. It's also, I think maybe I would say it's more about a rhythmic sort of phrasing, you know, a feel of expressing yourself. And I think it's very important. I think it's like the nuance of a lot of things, how we express, how we speak. You know, music is a vocabulary. We develop our own vocabulary by listening to other people, by learning other musics, and by developing our own unique way of expressing sound, ideas, and how we articulate that. And a lot of it comes from, I think, from listening to people talk. And there's a feel in everything. I think there's just like, I think it's a good word because I think it really is more about feeling music than thinking music. I think we need to feel the room, feel the sound, you know, and put some feel into your expression. Would be that. Feel is like heart, you know. Put your heart into it.
Awesome. So how did playing with DJ Logic change your style of playing, influence you?
Well, DJ Logic was a great influence on my, you know, making those breakbeat records. You know, when he was touring with Medeski Martin Wood, we would have those sound checks in the afternoon and the shows in the evening. And during the sound checks, everybody would be plugging in and setting up. And so I would be playing a little beat or something, and he would be scratching something or whatever. And then there were always these moments that would just happen without thinking. They would just kind of fall into place. And I'm always into, you know, pushing myself beyond the going back to the regular thing that you might do every day, you know, when you play. I mean, I do have like certain beats that I do all the time, but I'm always exploring other ways to express myself with beats, with sound, with melody. And he brought up to me, you know, in a sound check more than once, he said, you should do a breakbeat record. And I was like, what's a breakbeat record? You know, and he told me, he said, well, it's like you know, like DJs get these records and they're just drum beats or rhythm section, and where it gives, you know, a producer or a DJ to use it with some other sound source and create other music with it. And I thought that's such a great idea, and that's such a great way for me to sort of maybe have a collaborative sort of project with my fans. And that's what I ended up doing. I released Groove Bang and Jive Around, which actually was the title of a book that Steve Cannon, who I had mentioned, who had the gallery, Tribes Gallery, wrote a book, amazing, wild book. And I released this breakbeat record, and it was all because DJ Logic, you know, was pushing me to say, you should put out your own breakbeat record. And so I did. And then with that, I ended up inviting people to contribute anything they could in a recording using one of my beats and send it back to me. It was like a contest. And this was really before the internet, where you could sort of collaborate really quickly. They would send in a CD, and I would listen to the CD, and then I would remix that or add to it, or have guests play on it. And I ended up releasing this record, Drop the Needle. Two records, Drop the Needle and Antidote, and there were two Illy Beats remix records. And thanks to DJ Logic, you know, who suggested that.
Cool, man. A very specific question for you. What's your memories on the knitting factory shack party shows of 1996?
Yeah. Well, first of all, Knitting Factory for me is a very important place, but it was really the Knitting Factory, the original Knitting Factory, which was in another part of New York on Houston Street. And it was a smaller place, and that was where really I discovered my home and my world, like where I felt like I could develop as an artist. And the Knitting Factory that we had the shack parties at was when they moved to another place in Tribeca, and that was we had some great, I think it was every Monday night for a month or more. And we would have people come up and sit in with us each week. You know, it might be Vernon Reed, or it might be my friend Warren Blodow, or a singer. And people would come up and sit in with us, DJ Logic, DJ Olive, and we would, Charlie Hunter, Ciro Baptista, you know, all these different, John Zorn, all these people would come and sort of sit in for, you know, one part of, you know, an improvisation. We were like a rhythm section, so they were all very memorable and very dear to me. It was a really cool thing.
Cool, man. Outstanding. Well, I have one last question that I would like to ask you, and it's about your Meshes album, your album you did with Conducted Improvisation. Well, while you are recording, do you believe in a faithful recording of what just happened in the studio, or do you believe that you can edit, overdub, and do any kind of editing, mixing? What do you think about that?
Well, in that situation, it was really being true to what happened in the room and picking the best takes, or the best, you know, I recorded, we had, when we recorded Meshes, it was with a 12-piece, you know, orchestra of, you know, musicians that I chose, and I conducted them through, and I also gave them some graphic scores, 2 graphic scores. And we did 2 takes of each graphic score, so I picked the best one out of that. But as far as editing it and shaping it into a new composition, was not my intention. But I am open to anything. I'm open to, look, whatever works for anybody is fine with me. But in general, I would prefer to just, if it's going to happen, it's going to happen. You got 12 musicians, you got 6 musicians. What more does it need? You know, it's just maybe you'd want to edit something out. Maybe there's this one section that just is not working. That's okay. I think I did that once. I think there was one solo too many in this one piece, and it was like the weaker solo, or it was like just not gelling with everybody. So I just did that once. But that record is really true to what went down in the studio. I didn't overdub or, you know, or do any harsh editing or anything like that. It's really about what happened in the room for me. That was really important to me. It was really what we could do right there in the moment. And I was lucky to have my son Sawyer, who's, you know, was 15 at the time, with an iPhone, just kind of in the room and shooting as much as he could to kind of experience what it was like. And it was such a delight, you know, it was such a joy. And that record represents the best moments, to my ears, what were the best moments, you know. There was probably 2 hours of music. I think we had, you know, 50 minutes of music on that record.
Cool, man. It's a pretty good album. It's very nice. I love to hear it. And well, I think we have a time for one last question.
Sure.
So someone asked, how does conducting improvisation ensembles inform your own improvisation? Maybe improve your own improvisation?
Yeah, well, how does it? It does it by just experiencing it, you know. Like I said before, to me, it's no different than playing, you know, if I were to be playing drums or playing piano or whatever, some sound with other people, percussion with a group, it's just about tuning in and being part of the orchestra, being part of the ensemble, being part of the music. So by doing conducted improvisation, I'm the conductor, I have to really listen to as the overall thing, you know, how it's going, to the individuals, just like I do when I play in a band. So it improves my improvisation 100+%, and my awareness and my appreciation, you know, for every individual that's contributing, you know. So it really does help my playing and my my attention and my focus and appreciation of the musicians when I play with them, you know. So it definitely they feed each other, you know. It's really no different. I mean, if you're an improvising musician, instrumentalist, you are going to develop, you know, a way of composing together. And it's no different than a conductor with an ensemble. You're still composing together. It's the conductor isn't composing everything. Everybody's making choices, and it really depends on your strategy. You know, you could go in there and you could say, this is my piece. I have these signals, and it's going to be my piece of work. And the musicians are like, fine, you know. Other times it's like, this is our thing. Whatever happens, we're all collectively composed together. And that's how it is when I improvise with a group. When we don't say anything to each other until we play our instruments. Then we're talking to each other with our instruments. We record it, or we just play in front of an audience, and that's our composition. And we learn so much from that.
Super, man, so awesome. I just want to thank you a lot for that, for sharing all those great ideas. I really, really appreciate for your participation, and you are definitely a great artist. Thank you so much, Billy, for being here.
Thank you. It was my pleasure, and thank you for doing this. Thank you for sharing all the different, you know, artists and conductors and all that.
All right.
And so, what did I listen to today? So
what? Yeah.
The birds. I was outside, you know, sawing some bamboo, and I was listening to the birds today.
Cool, man. All right. Take care. Be safe.
Thank you so much.
And
bye, everybody. Thank you.
Stay well. Bye-bye.
Ciao.